Hi everyone, it's Victoria here, and welcome to the podcast. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know about the free courses the Victoria Stillwell Academy has available to enroll in right now for dog geeks like you. Just go to vsdogtrainingacademy.com and click the enroll button, and you'll see the free course options. That's vsdogtrainingacademy.com. See you there. A couple of years ago, I had the wonderful Zazie Todd speak at the Dog Behavior Conference, and she didn't disappoint. Her presentation was absolutely amazing. She has written a number of books. I know there's a new one coming out on October the 1st, and I am very excited about that. I've already seen some of it, but I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm not going to give away the goods but I'm telling you, you're not going to want to miss it when it comes out. She's agreed to come on the podcast again because we're going to talk and delve deep into a couple of scientific studies and also have a conversation about how we use science to inform what we do with dogs. So Zazie, welcome. Zazie Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me on the show. It's lovely to chat with you again.
Yeah, it's been a while.
But it's really exciting, and I'm very grateful that you invited me, and thank you so much for those kind words, because I remember that as an absolutely amazing conference from start to finish. All of the speakers were incredible, and I learned so much from being there, so thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. You are a PhD, you're animal behavior expert, award-winning writer, and you started Companion Animal Psychology in 2012 to explore ways in which science can help us have happier cats and dogs. You've written two of my favorite books, WAG, The Science of Making Your Dog Happy. I have a copy here, and I might be referring to it from time to time. So for people who are listening to this podcast, if you hear pages, me opening this book, that's what it is. And then this wonderful Purr, The Science of Making Your Cat Happy as well. And so these are two bestsellers. You know, Zazie, whenever I go into Barnes & Noble, I always go to the section because I always like to see my books, but also the books of my friends. And yours sell. So sometimes they're not on there, but then I go back again, and then there's more on the shelf, and I'm like, yes, these books are so beautifully written and so easy for everybody to understand. And you take the science and you make it relatable. Tell us, to begin with, how you got to where you are now.
Well, first of all, thank you for those kind words. That's lovely to hear. And really, so my background is in psychology and human psychology. And as you said, I started my blog in 2012, and the impetus for that was having my own dogs. Finally, I write in WAG about how I have wanted a dog for a long time. I dreamed of having a Siberian Husky, but I just couldn't get one because I was always working or traveling for work or what have you. And so finally I had two dogs, in fact, by then. And I kept seeing things on TV or hearing things, or people recommended books to me, and I would look at them and my hair would stand on end. And I would think, I don't understand, because this does not match with what I know from, my own background in psychology, because all psychologists do some learning theory and some animal behavior. You have a broad background from coming from that. And so the thing that really got me started, though, was actually reading John Bradshaw's book, Dog Sense, or In Defense of Dogs.
Fabulous book.
Wonderful book.
Yeah,
absolutely wonderful. And my mum actually sent me a copy in hardback as soon as it was published in England. She mailed it over to me because it didn't get published here until, I think, about a year later. And I was like, I did not know that canine science existed, and psychologists were not interested in dogs. They were interested in rats and mice and studies with rats and mice, maybe, or people, but pets were not seen as interesting. So all of a sudden, I realized that there was this field opening up of scientists getting interested in dogs and cats to a lesser extent. And so I thought, this is so interesting, and I started blogging about it, and that's really how all of this started, because the book came ultimately from my blog. And I just found so many interesting studies to write about, and it was just fascinating. So that's why I've just kept on going.
And you write for Psychology Today as well.
I do, yes.
Which is a great website. I mean, if you've never been on there, they have fabulous articles. And and many of Zazie's articles are on there.
Yes, and I write for some magazines as well from time to time too. So I write for different outlets as well as my blog. But I've really been concentrating on the books. And as you say, I've got a new book coming out in October, which I'm really excited about. But it's a lot of work, and it takes me a long time to write a book.
That's the next question I was going to ask you. How long does it take you? Because there is a lot of research. I mean, I know from writing my own books, and then I have to back everything up. And so it's almost like you write the book, and as you're writing it, you're keeping that list that you need to put in the back of all of the scientific studies that you need to back up what you're saying. That takes a hell of a long time to do, just to make that correct. How long does it take you to write?
A very, very long time, years. I mean, WAG took years. And as you say, you have to have all of those references. You have to have read them and know that what you're saying is right. And that's one of the things I love about your books as well, is that you can trust them. You know that you can absolutely trust what you say because you've got those references. And it's so important. But for WAG, I guess I had the idea for it back in 2015, and it didn't come out until 2020. So that's an idea of how long it took. Purr, of course, came along much more quickly. That was in 2022. But by then it was a bit easier because I was just following the same kind of format. But even so, I have a lot of references that I know about because I've written about them for my blog, or I've just read them out of interest. But even so, I have to go back and check it. Is there anything that I've missed? What's followed on from this? Once this study was published, what did other people do? So which other studies refer back to that study, for example? And it takes a long time. And then even when the book is practically finished, because I like it to be as up to date as possible, I'm looking to see, is there anything else? Is there something that's just come out that deserves to be in there and that I've got time to add? So right up until the last minute, I'm like, can I just add a sentence on this? Or could I just add a paragraph on that? Just to make sure it's bang up to date. And it's a big job and a big process. And I have lists all over the place of things to do or things to check.
So you're really doing the hard work for all of us and for any dog lover out there who reads your book. You've done the hard work. We just have to read it.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's true.
And the thing with WAG and Purr is that I tried really hard to make it accessible. So for each book, I put a checklist for a happy pet at the end. So even if someone does nothing else, if they just look at that checklist, they won't necessarily understand why I'm suggesting those ideas, but it will refer them back to the chapters where there's that information. But it will give them some important ideas for how they should think about caring for their dog or cat. And also at the end of every chapter, I've got a set of tips, apply the science at home. So people can see exactly how they can use the science in their everyday lives, because that's one of the things I love about it so much, is it's so relevant to our everyday lives with pets.
Well, I want to delve deep into a couple of studies that some of them are relatively new, others have been added onto, and some just fascinate me and interest me. And the study is the one that has come out of UC Davis, and it is about breed and neutering. And I think they've added another 5, breeds to when is the best time to spay, if you are going to, when is the best time to spay and neuter your dog, depending on the breed. And
yes.
I think it's fascinating. Now, we're not talking medical stuff here, right? We are not veterinarians. I know that now. We're not saying, hey, if your dog has reached a certain age, it's now time to go spay and neuter. We're just literally talking about this study. And one of the things that I wanted to read to begin with, and I'm going to read a little bit of this because I think it's important to put this into context. So bear with me. This is from the Frontiers in Veterinary Science, and this is about its brief research report article by them assisting decision-making on the age of neutering for German short wire-haired pointer, Mastiff, Newfoundland, Rhodesian Ridgeback, Siberian Husky, associated joint disorders, cancers, and urinary incontinence. And we're going to talk about that study. But in order to keep it as clear as possible, here's a bit of the history. And so I'm citing from this article, I'm reading from this article to give you a bit more of an overview of where we've been, because I think there is such confusion over whether you should and when you should spay and neuter and at what age and what does the science say. Well, here's a great study. But in the 1980s and 90s, of course, the prevalence of neutering dogs increased in the United States. Why? Because of the pet overpopulation problem. Also, it became almost trendy to neuter your dog to reduce behavioral problems. So that was what we kind of grew up with. That's what we were taught. And it is country specific, though. That's what I learned I started as a trainer in the UK, but came over to the US and expanded my business in the United States in Manhattan. And there, because we had such a massive pet overpopulation problem, it was seen as really irresponsible if you didn't spay or neuter your pet. So everything was spayed and neutered. And that's just what was normal. And then when I went back to England as well to film the show, that normality kind of went with me. And it just seemed like it's a logical thing to do. Why are there so many dogs here and cats? But why are there so many dogs that have not been spayed and neutered? Very odd. But it's not as simple as that. It would be great to say, yes, we've got this dog that has, or this female that's showing real aggressive behavior. And the way that we can get rid of that is to spay her. Or this male dog is showing a lot of male dominance behaviors. And in order to stop that, we're going to neuter that dog. Well, it became really popular. And the neutering of male dogs especially was accelerated by studies showing a decrease in aggression towards family members in a minority, that's important, of neutered dogs. But in the 2000s, this is where concerns begin to grow of the behavioral and health impacts of neutering for some dogs. And then the picture got very complicated. So research since then has emphasized that several cancers, joint disorders were more common in neutered than intact dogs. But there was a lack of information. And for more information, there was a study done on golden retrievers. So they were examined for risks of joint disorder, hip dysplasia, elbow dysplasia, cranial cruciate ligament tears, and cancers. And the age of neutering was found to have major specific effects on the risks for male and female dogs for the above mentioned 3 joint disorders and 4 cancers. So subsequently, there were 35 breeds and 3 weight classes of mixed breeds were examined for the roles of age of neutering on these health risks. Regarding the joint disorders, some heavier dog breeds over 20 kilos were at higher risk than lighter weight dogs. This pattern was also found, and I thought this was interesting, in mixed breed dogs, where those over 20 kilos were more likely to have a significantly higher risk of joint disorders when neutered than intact. And other genetic diseases were found to have increased expression with neutering, especially when performed early and for female breeds. A further problem with neutering is that it results in lifelong extremely high secretion of the luteinizing hormone, having effects on receptors throughout the body, perhaps altering aggressive and fearful behaviors and various other disorders. Now, I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds here, but then data was published in 2020 with these 35 breeds and mixed breeds, highlighting the vulnerability of some large dogs to increased risks of these disorders with early neutering. But this latest study from UC Davis, and this is where you can take over, Zazie, has added another 4 dogs to this list.
Yes, it's added 5 large breeds to the list. And it's actually also made the list kind of a bit easier to read in the way that they published it, because they've got a really nice table and you can just look down the table for the breed that you're interested in. And it's color coded to tell you if they should be spayed or neutered according to whether they're male or female, because it's in some breeds it's the same recommendation for both, but in some breeds it's one recommendation for male dogs and one recommendation for female dogs. And you can see what their overall recommendation is of whether to spay them at 6, 12 or 24 months. But these are just guidelines. They're not intended to tell you what to do. And as you said, neither of us is a vet, but these guidelines are designed for you to discuss with your vet, so that you can make the decision that's right for you and your dog. Because everyone has their own particular concerns. For example, some people might be more concerned about urinary incontinence issues than others. Some people might be especially concerned about joint disorders or cancers. And everyone has their own particular take on things. And some people might just really not want to live with an intact dog for very long and may prefer to do it sooner anyway. So it's a very, very complex issue. But what these guidelines do is they help people to understand something about the health risks. And it only looks at the health risks. It doesn't look at behavioral effects. So that's something else that some people will be more or less concerned about, depending. But they're very useful guidelines because they've looked at the correlation between the age of neutering and different types of cancer, different types of joint disorder, and urinary incontinence issues to see when they're more likely. And it's important to say that there's more research needed. I mean, it kind of is a cliche to say that, but it's always true. And one example of that is that they say in the paper that it's thought that the reason for joint disorders in large breed dogs who are spayed early might be because they're getting spayed or neutered before their growth plates have closed in their bones, but there's not actually enough research to say. So there isn't actually a full mechanism known for that. So they're making these recommendations, and they've made sure that they've had enough dogs in their database to be able to make a strong recommendation of what age they think people should spay or neuter. But as you said earlier, there are strong cultural differences too. And there are countries in which it is not the norm at all to spay or neuter your dogs, and everything seems to be just fine. Whereas where I am in Canada and where you are in the US, it's pretty much the norm to spay or neuter your dog. And that's what everyone expects to do. And you are sometimes seen as irresponsible if you don't, because there are concerns about overpopulation. So it's not telling anyone what to do. It's giving them information that they can use to make a good decision.
And more information is better than no information. I mean, I think if we can stay as informed as possible. I have the chart in front of me here as well, and it's a great color coded chart. So again, it's not taken as law, right? This is not like you have to do it at this time, but this is a guideline. And as you said, Zazie, it's to be discussed with your vet. I'd like to go through it if you don't mind, as we've both got this chart in front of us. And some of it is quite surprising to me. Well, maybe it shouldn't be surprising, but there's two breeds where they say leave them intact for either a male or female. But let's just go through the 40 breeds. First one is Australian cattle dog. Now, what the chart is that it's got the breed list down one side, and then it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns. And the first is no earlier than 6 months. So you should not spay or neuter. This is 3 is for males and 3 are for females. The first one for males is, the first column is no earlier than 6 months. You do not neuter, or no earlier than 12 months and no earlier than 24 months. And the same for females, no earlier than 6 months, no earlier than 12 months, and no earlier than 24 months. So the first one on there is the Australian cattle dog. And for both male and females, they say no earlier than 6 months. And then there's the Australian Shepherd, which is the same. But then we have the Beagle. No earlier than 12 months for the Beagle, for a Beagle male, but no earlier than 6 months for a Beagle female. Then you have a Burmese Mountain Dog, and that's no earlier than 24 months for a male, but no earlier than 6 months for a female. So already we're looking at this chart and going, wait a second, there seems to be very big difference between male and females. If they're both large breed dogs, for example, if they're both Bernese Mountain Dogs, why is it different for males than it is for females?
And I think this is where it really shows the importance of this kind of science, because in the past people might have said for a large breed dog, wait, or for male's weight, but now they can narrow it down to specific breeds to give these very specific guidelines. And of course, they don't fully explain exactly why it's different, and that's not what they were looking at in this paper. They were just looking at the effects on cancers or joint disorders or urinary incontinence. And for each of these breeds, it's probably worth saying, if someone's interested, the new paper gives those details of which disorders exactly their recommendation is based on, for the 5 breeds that they've added. And if you want to know for the other breeds, then you have to go back to the previous paper that published it for the full 35 breeds. And again, it will have that information and it will tell you exactly what it's based on. So obviously, sex hormones can have a role in affecting development. So that is what we would hypothesize, but that's not what the paper's looking at. It's just explaining specifically which disorders and then are most prevalent if neutering happens early in those breeds.
Now we've got some of the smaller breeds like the Corgi and Cocker Spaniel, and even the smaller ones, Chihuahua or Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, that's no earlier than 6 months in male dogs. And there's obviously disparity with female dogs as well, that yes, no earlier than 6 months for Cavalier King Charles and Chihuahua and for the Corgi, but for the female Cocker Spaniel and Collie, it's different. And so, but I think the ones that surprised me as well, Doberman Pinscher, there's 2 kind of red bits on this chart. And Doberman Pinscher, males just means leave intact. And Golden Retriever and females means sort of that you no earlier than 24 months. But then there's, this recommendation for Doberman Pinscher and Shetland Sheepdog females is based on the elevated risks of UI. That's what you were saying, yes, not joint disorders.
Yes.
Yep. Urinary incontinence. And golden retrievers leave intact. Females just leave intact.
Yes. And I think a lot of people will be very surprised to hear that and not necessarily happy about that either. But and again, this doesn't mean that that's what you have to do. It's what they're recommending. And so it's something that they're giving the information that you can discuss with your vet and decide what is right for you. But I think that's something that's going to give a lot of people pause for thought, because it's quite a surprising thing. In our culture, it's quite a surprising thing to hear.
It is surprising. It really is. And then, where we still have a pet overpopulation problem in the UK, but certainly not as bad at all. But then you're looking at places like Finland and Denmark and Sweden. And the last time I visited those places, they really don't have a pet overpopulation problem at all. In fact, they don't have many rescues. So they have to go to places like, Romania or Bulgaria to get animals to help with their pet overpopulation problem. But most of the dogs in Finland, Sweden, and Denmark are not spayed and neutered at all. They're intact and they live their lives intact. So it does say something about cultural differences and about where you live. Also here in the United States, things tend to be better further north in the country than they are down south, which is the reason why so many dogs are transported from the southern part of the United States to the northern part of the United States and to Canada as well.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying too that a lot of rescues and shelters will require dogs to be spayed or neutered, and they may not even adopt them out until they've been spayed or neutered. And many breeders also will require their dogs to be spayed or neutered. It will be in the contract that they have to be spayed or neutered by a certain age. And that's what we're all used to. And of course, pet overpopulation is part of the conversation as well. But that's not included in the paper, because the paper just focused on health risks. But this is part of the wider conversation about what everybody should do with their pet and when they should get them spayed or neutered. And again, for some people, it's quite shocking to think that you wouldn't. So it's really complex. I think it just shows how complex it is and how much there is to talk about, really.
Yeah, I know in the UK it's getting more. I think more people are spaying and neutering their pets than they used to, but it's still not as prevalent as it is here. And yeah, it's almost like I know that there's some intact dogs. You're not allowed to take them to some dog parks, or boarding facilities will not have intact males, especially and so it's almost like if you do, you're kind of forced to. If you want your dog to have some kind of social life like that, then you're almost forced to have them done so that they can socialize.
Yes. Or so that you can go away and leave them with someone.
Yes, so you can board them. I know.
Yes.
It's fascinating. Anyway, I hope I haven't confused anybody that's listening to this even more, but it is a really interesting study, and I think actually a really good one, because there are some studies out there that maybe aren't so good, and I do think trainers or anybody that reads studies needs to be careful about taking a study and going, that validates everything that I've been saying. Yeah, put it out there as that's it, done and dusted. What do we need to be looking at to ensure as much as possible that a study that we read is a good one?
Well, the thing is that there are limitations to every study, and the whole point of science is that it's iterative and it builds on what's gone before. So one of the things you can do, if you're actually looking at the original paper, they will always mention the limitations at the end of it. So you can bear those in mind, for example. And another thing to look for is a large number of people or dogs taking part, and because the more there are, the better. But also, there's a whole load of different things that we can look at. But another one to pay attention to is whether there are other studies that say the same thing, or is this just one study that's an outlier amongst a whole load of others that say the opposite, in which case you have to start thinking about, why is it that outlier? Why does it have different results? And there could be a whole host of reasons for it. It could be that it was badly designed. It could be that the other studies were all badly designed and they thought of a new way of doing things. So it could be a whole range of things, but it's really important to pay attention to how it was done, to what the limitations are, and whether other studies are saying similar kinds of things. Because when we get multiple studies with different methods, but they do say the same thing, that gives us a lot of confidence that what they're saying is actually the case.
Yeah, so that it's almost like, so when people say this is fact, right? Well, what is fact in science? Fact is it's an observation, isn't it, that's been repeatedly confirmed.
Yes.
And but truth is never really the truth in science is never really the final, though, is it? It can always move.
We're always learning new things. So we like, even if you look back a long way, there are things that we still use, but they've been kind of overturned or built on and developed. So if you think about the arguments that people used to have about whether behavior was nature or nurture, for example, and that's moved. And now we know that they're both intertwined, and we can't talk about just nature or just nurture. We have to talk about them together. So that's maybe one of the biggest ways in which things have changed over the decades. But also, so much has changed as far as what we know about dogs, because there's been so much more attention paid to them. So all of a sudden, we have a whole load of information about dogs that in the past we didn't know specifically for pet dogs. And so that's really useful as well. And everything is always changing. And I think the thing is, if you have learned something in the past, it's worth keeping an open mind and being willing to keep on learning as you go, because things will change, and the way that they change gives us new and useful, important information.
So you might have a hypothesis about something. That's kind of like a tentative statement, isn't it? But how do you make that into it's a theory? I have a theory. What's the hierarchy? Can I come up with a hypothesis, but then I have to prove my hypothesis?
You have to test your hypothesis to see if it's true or not. Yeah. And a hypothesis is something that's very specific, and it is testable. If it's not testable, it's not a good hypothesis.
Right.
So it has to be something that you can test. So that means you have to define exactly what you think is going to happen, what you want to know about. And then you will test it to see if the results are in line with that hypothesis or not. And you have to keep an open mind, because you don't know until you've tested it how it will actually turn out. And then the theory is the bigger set of ideas, or like a whole system of ideas around something. And the hypothesis typically will just be testing a tiny bit of that theory to see if it's correct or not. if it seems to be true or not. And it's really important. It's actually quite a skill, being able to narrow things down to a specific hypothesis. And also the way in which you do things for different scientists will take different approaches. So the ways in which they decide to test a specific hypothesis might be quite different too. So yeah, it's what makes science so fascinating. There's so much to learn all the time.
Isn't it? And but if we want to go fact, if we want to see if is this really true or is this going to change at some point, but if numerous studies come to the same or very similar conclusions, then we might be able to say that proves this potential theory. Does it prove it? It can't prove it 100%, can it?
No, it just sees that it's most likely. So we're usually using probability or effect size to look at something. So we're saying on the balance of probabilities, this is the case. But if lots of studies are coming up with the same or similar findings, that gives us a lot of confidence. So we can say we have a lot of confidence in it. And certainly you might have shown that the opposite finding was absolutely not what happened. And that's really useful information.
So it's useful information about what happened and what actually didn't happen. That is as useful as you finding out the information about what happened.
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. This is really important just to clear this up, because I know that I remember in Dunbar saying trainers are just getting too mixed up with the science. It's all become so sciencey now. And he was right. We were all getting into the science of this. And if a study came out, we're like, that's right, that's it. And actually, no, you got to take pause. You got to take a step back, and you really got to see what you're reading. And a case in point, if you don't have WAG, then go out and get it. But if you look at the back, and the same with my books as well, but your references at the back here are pages and pages and pages long. And we're not expecting you to go and look at every single research paper and every single study that backs up the content of the book. You don't need to do that. But what you do need to know is that what you're reading in this book has been thoroughly researched.
Yes, and very carefully fact-checked. And the same in your book. And the references are there so that if someone wants to, they can go and check. And I know that some people do that. Sometimes people email me to say that they've done that. Or they even email to say, I've gone and looked at this, and now is there anything new on that? And it is nice that a lot of research is accessible if you want to get a copy of it. Much of it is online for free. Not all of it. Some of it's still behind a paywall. But a lot of articles you can go and read. You can put the title of the paper into Google Scholar, and you can find it and you can follow it up. So I think it's really important that the references are there so that people know that we're not just making stuff up. We've done our research and we've checked all of these things. It makes a difference, I think.
A huge difference. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk about another, what I think is a really fascinating study. And then I want to go into your book a little bit more. Okay, I'll be right back. A quick break here to get a word from this episode's sponsor, the Victoria Stilwell Academy. Now, did you know that I have a school that teaches people to be dog trainers? I love It's Me or the Dog and my work as a dog trainer on television, but those of you who know me know that my true passion really lies with helping other people live their best lives with dogs. And I love seeing that truly magical transformation when that light bulb goes off with someone I'm helping with their dog. That's what it's all about. It's the secret sauce that pet professionals like me, who work with these amazing animals, that's what we all share. It's what makes being a dog trainer the most rewarding, enriching job I can imagine. It's why I love what I do. And it's also why I founded the Victoria Stilwell Academy, so that I could provide a roadmap to others who want to help dogs and the people who love them learn to do what they love doing at the highest level, that is, to become professional dog trainers. Earning a living working with dogs professionally, it's been a dream of mine for years. And that passion is what drives all of us at VSA to create courses that are specially designed to help adult human learners chase their dreams. Now, most people already know about our flagship dog trainer course, which provides both online only and in-person options. But did you know that we also offer both dog guardians and future professionals a fully refundable 10-hour online course taught by me and other awesome VSA faculty, and it's called the Fundamentals of Dog Training and Behavior course. Now, I know it's not the sexiest name, but it's one of the most dynamic learning experiences available to dog geeks, and it's a pretty awesome first step to see if learning with VSA is right for you. Now, as a Positively Podcast listener, you can use promo code PODCAST right now to get the Fundamentals course for 50% off. That is $150 value. So, take our course. Plus, we also have a couple of free starter courses. They're free, completely free, including a course called Building Your Dog's Confidence, which reveals the secret ingredient to a happy dog life. So, I encourage you to check out VSA today. As I said, we have courses for all levels of learners. So it doesn't matter whether you're a newbie with your first puppy or a grizzled vet already making a living as a pet professional. Visit positively.com/VSA to learn more and enroll in a free course. That is positively.com/VSA. We all want the best for our dogs, whether that means you taking home some key tips for your own dogs or adding the ultimate in professional dog trainer education. Visit positively.com/VSA today. VSA, it is the future of dog training. And now, back to the podcast. I'm back with Zazie Todd, and we're getting all sciencey. I'd like to talk about another scientific study that has a large sample size of dogs. It was done in Finland, and it's Mikola et al. It was done in 2021 about aggression in dogs. They took a sample of 9,270 dogs, 1,791 dogs in sort of a high aggression group, and I'm putting this in air quotes, by the way, and then 7,479 dogs that were in the low aggression behavioral group. And what they found, what they concluded was quite interesting, that aggression in dogs is most commonly associated with a number of factors. And one was being fearful, another was being older, being a male dog, being a small dog, I thought this was really interesting too. The others kind of make sense. Being someone's first dog and being an only dog. And the mean age of these dogs was about 4.5 years old, but they range from about 2 months to 17 years. 53% of the dogs were female. And so that there was also a probability of a difference in aggressive behavior, that they differed between breeds as well. The highest odds of aggressive behavior were in like the rough collie, miniature poodle, miniature schnauzer, and breeds with the lowest odds of aggressive behavior, the lab, the golden retriever, the Laponian herder, which I've never seen one of those in my life, but then, interestingly enough, the Chihuahua, German Shepherd, miniature Schnauzer as well, had higher odds of aggressive behavior than Goldens and Labs. So I thought, again, this was it seemed to be a very, very dense, well thought out, well done study. Do you know the study I'm talking about?
Yes, I think this is a really nice study. One of the things that's so good about it is just how many dogs took part in the study. So you've got a really big data set for this. Another thing that's really nice about it, you put aggression in quote marks because, of course, when we talk about aggression, yes, we're never quite sure what people mean exactly, or even if we want to use that label, So they had a very specific definition so that everybody knew exactly what they mean when they asked the dog guardians, is your dog aggressive? And I'm going to read their definition if that's
Please
all right.
Do. I think that's very important.
Yeah, just so that everybody knows what we're talking about. They defined it as frequent growling, snapping and biting, or trying to snap or bite. So that's actually quite a specific definition, and it's a narrower definition than it has been used in some of the other studies on aggression in dogs, which would have included lunging, for example. So that's very clear. That I think I like that as well, because it means that everyone answering the questions knew exactly what they were being asked about too. So this is a really interesting study. And of course, the headline finding from it is that fearfulness is linked to aggression. And This is not something that would surprise us, but it's always useful to know that things are found in research. It's probably worth mentioning that this study, like the previous study, it's a correlational study.
Yes.
So it's not proving causation, and that's always an important thing to say, but it's still very useful to know that the correlations are there. And a lot of research, especially research that uses surveys where it asks dog owners about their dogs, it tends to be correlational, but it's still very, very helpful. And because this is such a big study, these are really interesting findings.
They are interesting findings. And I mean, I think for those of us who work with dogs, we see a lot of dogs exhibiting these types of behaviors that we listed when they are fearful. And we know that older dogs there's a higher probability that they are in pain. There's some kind of cognitive decline potential, and that might exacerbate aggressive response. And then, yes, male dogs, we've kind of all heard that before, though, but, does the presence of testosterone, does that fuel that tendency? And then I have a small dog, a Chihuahua, and it's kind of known that the small dogs, especially the Chihuahuas, can be really fierce, and they can do all of that because they're small. Stands to reason. But someone's first dog, is it because you're a green dog handler? You don't really you haven't had experience of it? And an only dog, is there something to do with isolation for that?
Yeah, so we'll take the only dog first.
Yes.
And I think that's interesting. And this is where it actually really helps to point out that this is a correlation. So we don't know if someone notices that their dog is not very friendly, and so they don't feel like getting another dog, or they don't think it's a good idea to add another dog to the household. So that could be one reason. Or it could be that a dog that's an only dog doesn't get to spend much time with other dogs, and so they're not really properly socialized around other dogs, and so they become more aggressive simply because they're not used to being around other dogs. And we don't know, so because it's a correlation and it can't tell us what the cause is, it just says that these two things happen to go together. So it's a really interesting finding, and I think it would make a lot of sense that someone with an aggressive dog probably would not get another dog, in part because they know that the dog might not like it, but also they might themselves be struggling with their dog's behavior and not want to add another one into the mix. So that's probably it, but we don't know for sure. And then being someone's first dog, I find that really interesting too. But I think what I would hope is that if someone has a dog, they learn through their experience of having a dog. So by the time they get to their next dog, they've learned from some of the mistakes that they've made, and hopefully they're doing a bit better and they're a bit more knowledgeable. They probably know more about dog behavior, and they didn't look at knowledge in this study, but there's other research that shows that the more people know about dog behavior, the better things are going to turn out for their dog. Basically, they're more likely to do the right things that their dog needs. So I think probably if there's a message from that, it's that if someone has their first dog, they should take a training class with a good trainer. They should get themselves some good books or watch some good webinars or something in order to learn more about dogs, because that would really help them. And then little dogs, I have a little dog too. Mine is a Shih Tzu though, and they are generally known for being quite friendly. Mine came to me as a senior. He is very friendly. But as you say, the Chihuahuas, I think people do have an expectation perhaps that some Chihuahuas might have a few issues. We know from other research that people treat little dogs differently. They don't tend to train them as much.
Yes. I'm applauding here. Carry on, sorry.
They don't tend to involve little dogs in as many activities as they would with a big dog. And I don't have research for this, what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it because I think it's probably true, and I would be really interested to see some research on it. I think when the dog is little, people are probably more likely to try and just do something, because the dog's only little and they're not expecting a bad response. Whereas if a big dog is growling at them, I think they're more likely to pay attention to that. So I wonder if that's part of it too. But like I said, I don't know of any research on that. So that's something that I would like to see some studies on.
I'd love to see some studies on that. I got Jasmine when she was 6 months old, and she came with a whole host of issues. She's had a terrible start in life. And we got her at 6 months, and she she was in a box, and the people that had her before went to the rescue shelter and sort of shoved her over the counter and said, she poops everywhere. We want to give her up. We don't want her anymore. So there was this tiny little thing at 6 months old that the shelter took in. And then we wanted to get a second dog for our Sadie, our Labrador. And I wanted to get a dog that, maybe I could take on a talk show and you do great demos with and stuff like that. And then never take your daughter to a shelter because they're going to make the decisions for you. And we saw this little Chihuahua curled up in the corner, and it was a shelter that it did have a few kennels, but most of the dogs were just, they were free running around with each other. And she was in the room with the small dogs, and she just sort of laying curled up on a little bed. She had a little coat on with bunny ears saying Miss January. And of course, I was like, don't do it, Victoria, don't do it. But we honed in on this little Chihuahua, and we took her to the meet and greet room, and she came alive, especially with my daughter, who was 6 at the time. And that was it. We took her home. That's it. But she did come with a whole host of problems. She was a poop eater. She terrified. I mean, it seemed truly terrified of being around other dogs. And she kind of fit that whole Chihuahua thing. And I thought, you know what? I am going to treat you like a dog, like you are not just this thing that I'm going to keep picking up, though I do pick her up now. Now she's older. But yeah, I want you to be a dog. And she was with a Labrador, so she was allowed to be a dog. And she went up to the North Georgia mountains, and we went on hikes, and she was tough, hardcore Chihuahua. But I just noticed as well in her life of being little that people would sometimes, especially when guests come over, I mean, not do it on purpose, but sometimes step on her. So she was continually having to avoid it. And then I was like, okay, you're so small that if I am putting you in a position where people are going to step on you because you get under people's feet, always they're not looking where they're going, that's not fair. So then I started to have to learn, because I'd never had small dogs before, just large dogs. And I had to learn to advocate for her. And now it works. And now, now she obviously had to train her mother took quite a long time to train me, but eventually I got it. And I could definitely see in her that there's loads of different factors, especially for small dogs, where they have to navigate this very large world, where we think, oh, if they do lunge at something, that's not such a big deal, or they do snap, they're not going to hurt so much, which is not what we should be thinking at all.
No, and I think small dogs need training just like any other dog. And the other thing that's probably worth mentioning is we're talking about breed here, but we're talking about how people interact with those breeds. And the study did find that some breeds were more or less likely to be aggressive, but it did not say that that was genetics. And we know that there's a whole host of different factors, and some of these other factors would be involved as well. But specifically for some of the breeds that they said were more aggressive, they actually said they were breeds where they thought they would be more likely to have some medical issues that would cause pain. And pain obviously is something that might make a dog feel like being aggressive because they're not happy, they're in pain. So I think that's worth mentioning as well. So there's a whole host of different things going on, or that might be going on, to cause a dog to lunge or growl, or, well, lunging didn't count in this particular study, but to growl or to bite or try to bite.
Well, I just thank you so much for taking us through them. And I think those 2 particular studies, very interesting. If you want to go and find out more about these studies, I mean, there are so many online. It is so fascinating to read through them and I am so very thankful to all the people and the researchers out there for doing that, so that they can give us more information, because information is power. And the more that we know, the better we can be. Your book, thankfully, does that, right? Your book takes a lot of the science and distills it down. And as you mentioned, I mean, I was looking at play, and as you mentioned, right at the back is how to apply the science at home. So what we have learned so far and how you apply it. So that's what you were talking about, is that just at the end of every chapter, you have got these points. If people don't want to read through, but I would read through it all. But if you this is brilliant, how to apply the science at home.
Yeah, so I wanted to make it really easy for people to get information from the book, and it's designed to be read from start to finish. Obviously, it takes you all through your dog's life, from getting a puppy or a dog right through to having a senior dog and the end of life. But if all you do is flip through and read the section, the tips, the list of tips at the end of every chapter, you'll still have got some really useful information from the book, I think. And each chapter explains why those tips are important.
You put a quote in here from the wonderful Mark Beckhoff, who we love. And he said, "Let dogs be dogs. Let's appreciate them as individuals with unique personalities. Let them exercise their noses and all of their senses when they're home and out and about. Let them play with their friends and do zoomies to their heart's content. To appreciate what it's like to be a dog, we need to understand how they see, hear, touch, taste, and most of all, smell. We're most fortunate to have dogs in our lives, and we must work for the day when all dogs are most fortunate to have us in their lives." Wow. In the long run, we'll all be better for it. That quote I've seen that quote before. It just gets me though, because it's so on point. It's the reason why you spend so long, 5 years, writing a book like this. It's the reason why we're always pouring through the research papers so that we can make ourselves better for the dogs that come into our lives.
Yes, and I adore Mark Beckhoff, and I love that quote from him, and I think it's so important. And there is so much that we can all do to make life better for our dogs, and dogs are just wonderful creatures, so they absolutely deserve for us to do that.
Now, this new book that you're writing, I'm going to have you back on the podcast because we are going to talk about it. This subject, I won't say what the subject is, but this subject, I think, again, is quite poorly understood. And you've taken it and done what you have done with Wag and Purr and made it relatable and easier for everyone to understand. What does it feel like to you to take on that responsibility?
It does actually feel like a big responsibility, and the same as when I was writing WAG, I'm just going through all the time, cross-referencing everything to make sure that I haven't made a mistake, that I've accurately represented the science that I've read, that every study that I've mentioned is cited in the back of the book. There's a whole load of other studies that I read that I wasn't able to cite because there's a word limit on a book, so there's only so much you can put in. But yeah, it feels like a big responsibility, but at the same time, I hope it will really help people with their dogs, because that's what motivates me to read all the science and to write about it, is that it makes such a difference to people. And so I really hope that this book will make a difference to people and with their dog, and help them with their dog when they're having a hard time with their dog.
I'm going to put you on the spot, but to end, do you have like some top tips that you would tell dog lovers from your experience? What would be the most important things? If you had to choose 3, what would you say to people with their dogs if they want to have a better relationship? Or
I always pick use rewards to train your dog, because that's so important, and there are still, unfortunately, people who don't do that all of the time. So only use reward-based training. Give your dog food rewards or other rewards as positive reinforcement for what they do. I would say give your dog opportunities to use their nose, and it could be a formal thing like a nose work class, or it could be something simple like you hiding treats in the grass in a safe space for them to find them. Or I like the word sniffari. Take your dog on a sniffari where they have lots of opportunities to sniff. And then I would say, it's so hard to choose a particular thing. I would say for this one, I'm going to pick, give your dog a safe space where they can go and they can relax and chill out and know that they will not be disturbed, that you will not go and get them from that safe space. So it could be a dog bed, it could be a room, it could be a crate where they can go whenever they want to, and they can stay there as long as they like and come out whenever they like. So they have that choice of a little space that they have complete control over, and it's theirs, and it helps them to feel safe.
And she's saying this with the science to back her up. Zazie, Todd, thank you so much. Guys, go out and get WAG, the science of making your dog happy, and also Purr, the science of making your cat happy. Look out for a future amazing book by Zazie Todd. And thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
You're very welcome. Well, guys, that was so good. I love talking about science. I learn something all the time, and I'm a bit of a geek. I love going in and reading through all of these scientific studies, which can be dense, but that's the reason why books like this are so important, because it takes what is out there and distills it down so that it's easily understandable and accessible for everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and I will see you again. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Victoria Stilwell's Positively podcast. For Victoria's online dog training courses, more information, and helpful dog training tips, visit Victoria's official website at positively.com. Get connected on Facebook, Instagram, and other social media as Victoria Stilwell, and follow her on Twitter at Victoria S. Learn to become a professional dog trainer with the Victoria Stilwell Academy at vsdogtrainingacademy.com. And be sure to tune in next time as Victoria helps you and your dog live your best life together, positively.